I'm Lois Shetler McCracken, daughter of Raymond Shetler and Mary Ashley Shetler. Well, for a long time, and I remember when Don was born.
Here's your little
Yeah, he was eight.
You
was
probably
8 years
hated
younger.
him for coming.
Actually, I was 16, I think, when we moved out on Peck Road, so Don would have been 8.
So you're a city girl.
That's right. And I
Wow.
remember when he went, we lived on West Mount Street, which is off of Ridgeway Avenue, and I went to school 40, which was just around the block from me. Everybody walked to school, and it was a very short walk for me. All right, and then that was closed down. So when I was in 6th grade, I had to go to school 41, which was maybe a good mile walk from our house. So that's where my brother went there too, I think. And I remember he walked home from there one time. Didn't tell anybody, and he left school and walked home on his own.
So you.
And my mother had 2 brothers, an older brother, George Ashley, and Clark Ashley was younger. And her brother, let's see, they lived in Honeoye, and her father died when he was fairly young. I think her brother had maybe gone to college, maybe been there 1 year or less, wherever he was going, and he had to come home and run the farm. And I have an idea that his father, who was William Ashley, was probably fairly well off because they had some very nice, rather expensive antiques and so forth that had been in the family. So I have an idea that they
What road did she grow up?
Did my mother grow up on? Well, it's Ashley Road now. I'm sure it was. I don't know if it was called that then, but that's where she grew up. And Cindy, my cousin's daughter, Cindy Wagner now owns the property, and she had, I think the place has been torn down, which they hated to do because it was an historic home. But she wanted to build a place, and it was going to cost so much to remodel and do what it needed to be done, and then it wouldn't have been right, that it was much cheaper to tear it down and remodel it.
So did they have a big farm?
I don't know how many acres, but I assume that it was fairly large, yeah. George Ashley, her older brother, had 2 daughters. Joyce and Jean were my cousins. Joyce died of pancreatic cancer when she was fairly young. She never married, and Jean and her husband built a new home next to the Ashley homestead, and they still have that. Sheep. The Ashleys were sheep farmers. They were sheep farmers. It was a George Ashley farm. George and Irene, he married she was a school teacher, and he was as proper as you could be, George Ashley, and his wife Irene was just full of it. She loved to get all the men over and tell them some rather risque jokes and that. She was just full of it.
Ooh, Irene?
Irene.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I remember her well. and I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
him
but
a
she
little
was
bit.
just, her eyes would just sparkle, and but George was very proper. And the younger brother, Clark, was considerably younger, I think. And when he was a fairly young man, he was working on top of a silo, and I think like a tornado came along and he was blown off of it. and injured his knee and was hospitalized for quite some time. Well, from the time I knew her, as I said, she was a widow when my mother was. Oh, I want to say something else too before that my grandfather Ashley would have died long before I could have known him when Mom was still young. And I never realized till I was grown up. One time we were driving through Honeoye, and my mother pointed out a house and said that she used to live there and worked for her room and board and buggy to school the 8 or 10 miles every day and picked me up. If I wanted to go to school, I had to live in town. So they must have been valued education pretty much, her mother's family, or they wouldn't have done it. And Grandma had gone, my grandmother, Grandma Ashley, I always called her Grandma Holke because her name had changed, had gone to RIT. It was called Mechanics Institute. She went to Mechanics Institute.
Wow.
When she was young. And Grandma Ashley was also a very good artist. I had some pictures that she painted. She painted beautifully, but she had to give it up because at that time it was lead paint, and she was getting poisoned or something, the reaction. She could not handle the paint. So she stopped painting. But the pictures that I saw were very professional looking.
Well, didn't Aunt Minnie paint too?
Aunt Minnie did too, yeah. Well, I started saying that when Clark, the younger brother, was blown off a silo and had to have a long hospitalization, and one of the nurses there, Aunt Nan, they ended up getting married, fell in love and got married.
Oh, wow.
So Clark married Nan. I can't think of her maiden name. No. And they had 2 children, Ronwen, who I'm still in touch with, Ronwen, and her brother was considerably younger, John Bill. John Bill died when he was about 6. He had a lot of birth defects when he was born and had to have several surgeries, and on one of them when he was about 6. He didn't make it through. So that's her 2 brothers. Uncle Clark, the Ashley homestead was up there on top of the hill there. And then you went down a big hill, and there was Uncle Clark, Mother's youngest brother, had built a cabin there. And that wasn't their main residence, but they used it as a vacation home. And there was a brook that ran through there, and my cousins and I, we used to play in that brook all the time. On the sulfur, yes, there was sulfur water at Aunt Irene's. The homestead had sulfur water. Yep. Grandpa was one of 11 children. Elmer Shetler married Minnie Mitchell. They lived in Pennsylvania, and I think they were quite young when they moved up to New York State. It would have been a horse and wagon. And of the 11 children, I think the one that was next older often looked after the next one, and his next older child was Uncle George Shetler. And Uncle George always said, Uncle George looked and my father looked the same facial features, but George was a big tall man and Dad was pretty short. And Uncle George always used to tell me that it was because he kept stealing Ray's bottle on the way up to New York that Ray never grew very tall. So, I really don't know. I know that at the time I was growing up, they never said anything bad about anybody in the family. You never talked about family members. And it wasn't till I was an adult that I guess old Elmer Shetler was quite a tyrant. Where Minnie actually, I think, owned the property. And was very highly thought of in the community. Because I remember they said like schools closed down and that when Minnie Shetler died. And my uncle or grandfather Elmer, I don't remember much except he had had a stroke. He raced a train. He loved horses. The kids said that he liked horses, thought more of the horses than he did his kids, because the kids never had any shoes in the summer and things like that. But the horses always were taken care of very well. And Elmer Shetler raced a train one time, tried to make it across the train with his horse and buggy, and he didn't make it. And he got hit, and I think after that he was not quite right. And I just remember him, I was scared to death of him when I was little, because he'd want me to come over and you get near him, and he couldn't talk, he'd grunt, and he'd wave a cane at me, and this terrified me. They all moved up. They moved up, yeah, when Grandpa was little, and so the younger children were born there. And it's quite unusual because she had Minnie Mitchell Shetler, who I never knew, she was dead before I was born, had 11 children, and every one of them lived. And in those days, before antibiotics and so forth, and they just didn't live through childhood like that. Ella was the oldest, then Henry. I don't know where Josiah would have been in there. Henry and Josiah. Bert was Bert.
As in Bert, because Joe and Bert lived together.
Yeah.
Brother and sister.
Yes. But Aunt Bert was divorced.
Right.
Yeah. So Bert was one of the Aunt Bert was one of the older ones. The younger ones were Uncle Ernie was the youngest. Marge was maybe next. Well, Minnie was in there. Ellis? Did I mention Ellis? Ellis?
Yeah,
Alice was the only one I think that didn't live to a ripe old age. He had a heart attack, maybe in his 50s. And he might have survived it, but he was maybe a lineman or something. He was up high. And when you had a heart attack and fell down, he didn't make it. Whether it was a heart attack or the abrupt stop when he fell, I don't know. But Bill would have been, Ella and Bill were the oldest, I guess. Okay. When the original farmstead burnt down.
Is that Shetler Road?
Yes. It happened from something from the wood stove, and I really forget what it was. But it burnt down. Because I remember there was a back door that never went out. It was sort of like locked, and there was a big drop from there to the ground. And I don't recall the particulars, but almost like Aunt Minnie almost blamed herself for something that she did with the fire, whether she stoked it too hot or what, I don't know, and I'm not entirely sure. My father, first of all, not all Shetlers that are related are spelt the same way. Shetler. Some of them had SCH. And an EA. Maybe that's it, EA. Now, forget the C. I think Janet's right.
Yes.
EA. Yeah.
Dio, yeah.
Dio was, okay,
He spelled his name different, didn't he?
Yeah. I'm trying to think who his father was. Yeah. I don't think my father ever knew him till when he married Carol. Carol, researching family, got to know us, but I never knew Dio
Really?
when I was young.
My
Dad had a cousin. Oh, what was his name? Martha. Lloyd and Martha. And Lloyd they lived in Pennsylvania, and Lloyd was very crippled with arthritis. His hands were all like this, and he couldn't walk. I remember them being in touch with them, that we used to see them all the time. And I know all of the Shetler children left home as soon as they were able. My father left there, in fact, Dad never went beyond 8th grade. My dad only went to 8th grade. And he left and lived, my aunt, the oldest child, Aunt Ella, lived in Rochester then, and he lived with Aunt Ella and her husband and got a job at Kodak. And my mother's memories of the Depression were not unhappy. Lauren, my husband, mother, remembers the Depression as being really bad because they had a bunch of children and things were rough then. My mother remembers it as rather a good time because my dad was only working maybe 2 days a week, 2 or 3 days a week. But she said everybody had time, a lot of time, and they would go out on picnics and do things. And she said you never had to be embarrassed because you didn't have things.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Sound like the pandemic? Wow.
Yeah.
And he retired from there.
I don't know if he was 16 or 18. I don't know how old he was
I
when
thought he quit to be a farmer.
he did.
Yeah, but
He did.
that's 20
But
years.
he bought the farm on Peck Road. Crowley's.
Yeah.
Some of you know
Yeah.
Bob Crowley. All right, his mom and dad, Jack and Ferdinand. Jack Crowley was quite the Irishman. He and my parents were always good friends, and they were playing cards I think it was New Year's Eve, and they told Mom and Dad about this farm on Peck Road that had just gone for sale, and they ought to look at it. So anyway, they did, and made an offer in it, and we moved out there. And at first he farmed and maybe worked both or something, I don't know, but then he left. And I remember when he left Kodak and on the farm that things were always tight. We never had a lot of money then.
How old were you when you bought the farm? Were you young?
Well, no, because I was started school. I finished the year at John Marshall High School, and then when we moved out, I must have been 16, and went to Hilton High. Well, I lived there from till I was 16 to 19, yeah, and then I got married and left home. He went to Hilton High too.
Oh.
Actually, he asked me out. I think I was probably a sophomore then, and he asked me out one time. I still remember it was a basketball game. And no way. I did not want. I was going with
He's
somebody else
laughing.
and not
He's
interested.
laughing.
Was not interested. And then when I was a senior, we went to his sister. He had a sister that was a year younger. His sister and I and another girl that was a year younger than I all went to Silver Lake Methodist Camp. And when I came back from there, I think that must have jogged, when Audrey was talking about me, it must have jogged his memory, and he called me up one time and asked me out, and that's it.
It was okay.
Yeah. So So.
Do you know how Grandma and Grandpa met, or did you already talk about that?
No, I don't know how they met, but I think that because they lived near each other, they must have known. There were a lot of brothers and sisters, and I remember some things. Can't remember. George Shetler telling about how the kids built a raft and Honeoye Creek one time when it was flooded, how they went down that and had quite a time. Oh, George Norrison's son lived at the Shetler. Okay, Aunt Bert was married to somebody named George Norrison. She had one baby, and then they split up, which was most unusual in those days. And she came back to live at home, and her husband kept the baby.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, George there. Can't think of all of his kids. Steve, out in Colorado.
Oh, he's in Colorado.
And there was one that lived at the Shetler. There's one that lived at the Shetler homestead. Yeah. Aunt Bert was always very outgoing and fun-loving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she
was
went
a nurse too, right?
Yeah, yeah. And Marge was a nurse too. And she went down to Florida to get a divorce. And fell in love with somebody there who was going to marry him instead of the one she went for the divorce. And I think he died, and then she came back up. But came back here. And he died in a tractor accident. The tractor turned over because it was hilly. Yes, he was the one that kept the house and farmed, and then Bert was the lady of the house. Yeah. And the barns were on the other side of the road. You had to cross the road to get to the barns, if the barns are still there.
Oh, you mean Augers?
No, Augers lived. Marge Shetler married George Auger.
Because they lived near the road, and their barns were on the other side.
Yeah, yeah. But they lived on, was it Canandaigua Lake? That's it. That's it, Honeoye Lake. That's it. I remember going to the school at the end of Ashley Road with Joyce and Jean when I was a kid, and I thought that was really neat because they had these small classes, and we got really nice stuff like an Easter egg and all this stuff.
That you never got before.
No, not when you were in a big class.
What college did you go to?
I didn't. Okay. When I was 18, I had a New York State scholarship. But at 18, you know all you want to know. All you know, you don't need to know anymore. And I got married at 19. I wanted to get married. Back in those days, you got married. And
You taught school without college?
now wait a minute. And then, actually, Linda was, I think, a senior in high school before I started going to college.
Wow.
And I went to college. And Minnie watched the kids when I was taking summer school and stuff to help me. So, no, I didn't get my
She was out here for the summers?
She used to come and stay at my place a lot and take care of the kids. Minnie was like a second mother to me. I'm sure that's why I wanted to be a teacher. And then, of course, I traveled a lot with Minnie.
Right.
I'd only taught a couple years, and went abroad with her. And every other year, we would take classes abroad, and that would be like 6 weeks of school, and then we'd travel for a couple weeks and then come back. When she first asked me, I said I didn't think I could go and leave my family. And Lauren says, "Oh, you always wanted to travel and do things. Do it while you can." So I traveled then, and went before other people did. Now when everybody else goes, I stay home. Lauren said it was the best investment he ever made, sending me to college. because that retirement. We wouldn't have starved if I hadn't gone to college, but we lived very comfortably with my retirement.
Where did you live when you first got married?
We lived in an apartment on Lake Avenue in Hilton. When we first got married. And where did we live? I can't remember where we lived before we. Larry was. We bought our farm here when Larry was ready to go into kindergarten because I wanted him to, kindergarten or first grade. The kids were, Linda was ready to go into fourth, Gail second, something like that. And I started teaching in, trying to think, the early 70s, and I retired in 96. I'm thinking about it.
96. Wow.
Yeah. Grandpa and Grandma? Oh, my mother was the sweetest thing that there ever was. She just lived for family.
Both of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Very mild.
Yep. Yep.
There you go.
I never, it's like they never had words or anything. The only time I ever saw, Grandma was petrified of snakes. And
Yeah, we're friends.
and one time a snake had come up a register, I think, and was behind the couch. And when she saw that, it was like, if he didn't fix that he block it off somehow, she wasn't going to be in that house anymore. And all the chicken barbecues that Grandpa used to have, every year he'd have a chicken barbecue. Yeah. When he was in the city, we lived close enough that he walked to work, I think. Of course, back in those days, you only had one car.
What were his hobbies?
He liked photography. In fact, even as retired, they belonged to a camera club that met over in Spencerport.
Water?
And they had a lot of
Just had
close friends
Okay.
at that camera club.
Need
No,
a
I've got
refill?
plenty. No. But mainly that. And of course, for years, they never could travel. And when he sold the farm, he was extremely lucky because some builder bought all the land around there, Peck Road and all that, everything. They bought up everything. And not one of those ever went through except my father's. My father got paid for it. And so he was able to retire and travel. They went to Florida every year. And actually, even when I was little, they used to vacation with Aunt Minnie. They would go away for like a couple weeks. I remember I stayed with my mother's friend. Okay, that was my grandmother was a Hamilton, and her brother was Ole Hamilton. I remember picking
It's good.
cucumbers a lot, and they are very prickly, and they're down very low. And he never did propose to me. All he said was, "You wouldn't marry a farmer, would you?" And I never said yes or no because I wanted to marry him, but I didn't want to pick cucumbers and be married to a farmer. Hank was a farmer too. Two of them were in the bowling business in Buffalo. One was Uncle Bill and Uncle Ernie.
Different businesses?
Yes, they were not tied at all. Well, I think Ernie went in it because Bill had done well in it, and Gail Shantz, yeah. Is Lynn there too? Because Uncle George had 3 children.
So,
Gail was adopted. And the other 2 were biological. Aunt Madeline's sister died in childbirth. And so they took Gail and had her. Yeah, she was a teacher and he had a good job. But yet they were closest with my parents. We used to vacation. I remember one year we went to Kinesis Lake, was it? Grandma Holke had, my Grandma Ashley, Hamilton Ashley, had dementia in the end. And then my mother, of course, had the dementia. In fact, he was diagnosed at first Alzheimer's, and now it's not, because we go to the Strong Memory Clinic once a year, and she said to me, "What happened since the last time?" You know, because once the farm gates fell on him and he was operated on, the doctor said, "I can fix his hip, but I don't know." And when he woke up from that, he didn't know his kids or anything. Before that, he had problems, but we lived normal. We could drive to Florida and that kind of stuff.
Now, what happened to him? The
The farm gates fell on him, broke his hip. So he had to have pins put in his hip or something. And when he came out, he never knew any of the
They
kids
say
knew.
that anesthesia can do
Yes,
that to
yeah,
you.
and that's
It
why
can
I said I would-
accelerate it.
That's why I said I would never have any, no matter how bad the knee or anything gets, I would not have it done now for.
so with a name like McCracken, he's got to be Scottish.
I don't know if it's Scottish or Irish, because when I traveled, they always said I always heard MAC was Scottish and MC was Irish. But when I was in Scotland, there was a lot of MCs on tombstones and stuff. So
How many generations does his family go back from the U.S.?
his father came from Canada. His father's side of the family came from Canada. Yeah, he worked as a tenant farmer, and then he worked at Kodak and did a farm too. I think he just worked at Kodak during the war years, his father. All the Shetlers were. Dad was always, they all enjoyed life and had a positive outlook. Mom was a worrier. She worried enough for Dad and she both. But Dad always was positive.
When I met with Gary, he mentioned something about
In fact, they lived to be a pretty ripe old age. My father's mind was sharp right to the end, but his legs went. His legs just didn't move right for him anymore. I don't know, but several of them lived. A lot of them lived to be in their 90s.